I don't think there's a better job in the Army than being an NCO on a civil affairs team. There's nowhere else in the Army that a staff sergeant or sergeant first class has a strategic effect on a region or theater that they do on a civil affairs team. Our NCOs are routinely entrusted to engage directly with U.S. country teams and embassies and indigenous partners and institutions around the world on behalf of theater commanders. The language skills and cultural expertise that they gain through the training pipeline is exceptional, and they'll always be confronted with and expected to solve complex problems with little more than the knowledge of the nation's interests and an understanding of the strategic intent.
Hi, and welcome to the 1CA podcast. My name is John McElligott, your host for today's episode. We're joined today by Command Sergeant Major Garric Banfield. He entered the U.S. Army in June 1992. Since then, he has served in numerous leadership positions ranging from Scout Team Leader to Brigade Command Sergeant Major. He currently serves as the Brigade Command Sergeant Major of the 95th Civil Affairs Brigade, Special Operations Airborne. CSM Banfield's assignments have ranged from the 1st Squadron 3rd Cav Regiment, 4th Squadron, 7th Cav, 124th Infantry Regiment, 15th Cav Regiment, and the 1st Cav Regiment in Germany. He then switched over to Civil Affairs and was First Sergeant for the 96th Civil Affairs Battalion, Special Operations Airborne, based in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He's also served as the Senior Enlisted Advisor for the Combined Arms Center Special Operations Forces Cell at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, the Battalion Command Sergeant Major of the 81st CA Battalion in Fort Hood, the Brigade Command Sergeant Major of Task Force Sinai in Egypt, and Action Officer in USASOC for the Commander Initiatives Groups in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Command Sergeant Major has deployed on several contingency and combat operations to include Operation Desert Falcon, Operation Joint Endeavor, Operation Joint Guard, Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation New Dawn, and the Multinational Force and Observer Mission. He holds a Master of Science degree in Defense Analysis and Irregular Warfare from the Naval Postgraduate School and a Bachelor of Science degree in Information Systems Management from the University of Maryland, University College. CSM Banfield, thank you very much for being on the 1CA podcast.
Hey, sir, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
I was trying to look up your name and the origin of both Garric and Banfield, and it looks like it's an Old English name. I think the finding what I found for Garric was one who governs with a spear and mighty warrior. Do you know the background of your first name or surname?
Well, sir, actually, I was originally going to be named Garrett. However, my mother's best friend, who was pregnant at the same time, had her son a couple of weeks before I was born, and she took Garrett, so Garric was the next thing on the docket. So
okay.
That's the origin of my name. However, I do appreciate your research and background, and I'm gonna latch onto that and say it was the spirit of the warrior that she saw in me when she named me.
Exactly. That's awesome. Thank you again for being here. We're really glad to have somebody from the 95th. We wanted to dig in for the listeners to what the 95th is, what your responsibilities as a Sergeant Major are, and talk a little bit more about the battalions that serve under the 95th. So I want to start by asking you, how long have you been with the 95th?
Sir, this time around I've been with the 95th for about a year. I assumed responsibility as the Brigade Command Sergeant Major last May. However, I originally came to the 96 in 2005 after graduating the Civil Affairs qualification course. And I served with the 96 in Delta Company as a team sergeant, then a first sergeant in both Charlie Company and HHC 96. And then I left the 96 in 2011 to go out to Naval Postgraduate School in California. Following graduation from Naval Postgraduate School, I was assigned to the Combined Arms Center Special Operations Forces Cell at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where I served as the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the CACSAW cell. And then I was selected on Battalion CSL in 2012 and moved out to Fort Hood, Texas. served as a battalion command sergeant major for the 81st Civil Affairs Battalion, and from 2013 to 2015. In 2015, I was selected for an Army Brigade command sergeant major position, which I served in Task Force Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt from 2016 to 2017. And upon returning from that assignment, I worked up at USASOC as an action officer for the Commander's Initiatives Group. And then I assumed my current position as a 95th Brigade Command Sergeant Major.
Wow. That's an awesome career trajectory that you've had. So how many total years in service now? Since 1992, I guess, right?
Right. So I've got about 27, in July 9th, I'll hit 27 years.
Wow. That's awesome. Now, a lot of listeners are probably familiar with a first sergeant and maybe the battalion sergeant major. What are the responsibilities for the brigade command sergeant major and your job in the 95th?
So my principal duties as a brigade command sergeant major are what they are outlined in the AR 600-20, which is to advise the commander on the performance, training, appearance, and conduct of the brigade. I'm also responsible for enforcement of Army policies and standards and administering the unit's non-commissioned officer development program. So what that translates down to in my eyes is I'm the commander's wingman. I'm 100% committed to making sure my commander is successful, and I take a lot of personal pride in understanding his intent and then taking the initiative and providing guidance and direction to the force to meet his intent. Colonel Burnett, the 95th Civil Affairs Brigade commander, and I had the privilege of serving together for 2 years as a battalion command team in the 81st Civil Affairs Battalion, which meant we didn't need to spend a whole lot of time getting to know each other when we began our current roles together. In general, the CSM is very similar to the role of a first sergeant and the role of team sergeant. I see the role of non-commissioned officers abroad at every echelon as being the agile member of the team that provides balance and fills in the gaps wherever it's needed to accomplish the day-to-day business of the organization, get the training, validation complete, and really enforce and uphold the standards of the organization. This allows the commander to focus on providing direction to the organization, whether that be at the team, company, battalion, brigade, or higher levels.
Okay. Could you describe the relationship then, so between the brigade and the battalion sergeants major, and what kind of direction or guidance you may provide to them, or does that come from their battalions only?
So really, the most critical relationship, although we're all one team, the most critical relationship in those command teams is between the command sergeants major and that commander. So while I provide guidance and direction to the battalion command sergeants majors and provide them guidance on how to accomplish the commander's intent, really, they take their marching orders from their battalion commanders, who in turn the battalion commander take their marching orders from the brigade commander. So the NCO support channel is almost an auxiliary channel that is there to support the chain of command.
That's awesome.
And we have absolutely consistent and constant communication between the battalion command sergeants major and myself.
Okay.
We talk on a daily basis. They keep me abreast of issues within their formations that I sort of coalesce and provide that feedback to my brigade commander.
Okay. Now, you've been with the 95th now for a while, as you've just described. What would you say is an elevator pitch or capabilities brief for the 95th overall?
Well, that's a great question. Several aspects to that. First is who we are. We're warriors, problem solvers, and regional cultural experts focused on the human component of the land domain in support of the geographic combatant commanders, U.S. ambassadors, and at the end, the nation's priorities. But it's what we do as a brigade. And those break down into 3 key tasks: civil reconnaissance, civil and unified action partner engagement, and human network analysis. So our brigade has recently refocused on developing our medal, and we currently have 5 tasks that are brigade medal tasks, and those are establish civil affairs task force, conduct human network analysis, coordinate unconventional warfare, coordinate foreign internal defense, and coordinate foreign humanitarian assistance operations. And the battalion medals are coalesced in a line to support that brigade medal, which is passed further down into the guidance that the battalions give to their companies for their training. So we're trying to get to a sustained readiness model where it's medal-based, evaluated and validated against performance metrics that support the medal, as opposed to solely mission-focused training for an upcoming mission.
Roger. Now, you had talked about how you started out in the 96th, and the 95th Brigade grew out of that 96th Battalion in 2007. How many battalions are there currently under the 95th, and aren't they regionally aligned? Could you talk about those battalions and their regional alignments?
Absolutely. So when I arrived at Civil Affairs, it was the 96th, and there were regionally aligned companies within the 96th. In 2006, the Quadrennial Defense Review outlined the growth of civil affairs across the Army and directed the growth of the 95th Civil Affairs Brigade. And then we immediately went into growing the 96th into a brigade organization, and the brigade was actually activated in 2007, and it rapidly grew from one battalion into 5 regionally aligned battalions that we have today. And those are the 91st Civil Affairs Battalion, which is focused on Africa and regionally aligned with Africa. The 92nd Civil Affairs Battalion, which is regionally aligned with Europe. The 96th Civil Affairs Battalion, which is regionally aligned with the CENTCOM AOR. The 97th Civil Affairs Battalion, which is regionally aligned with the Indo-PACOM Theater. And the 98th Civil Affairs Battalion, which is regionally aligned with Southcom. So they're focused on South and Central America.
Would you say that the battalions will flex, grow a little bit as needed if there's more focus on CENTCOM AOR as opposed to AFRICOM, for example? Or now we're doing a lot of work in the Indo-PACOM area, so does 95th get more focus based on whatever the higher is telling the 95th and the 1st Special Forces Command and saying, hey, 95th, we need you to flex in this area more than others? So
we're very, very focused on getting our civil affairs officers and NCOs regionally aligned by the battalions that they've been trained and educated for their language, their regional analysis and studies into those battalions. Each battalion has 6 line companies in a battalion with 5 civil affairs teams, and really based on the global employment requirements, we feel that we're right-sized right now to meet the requirements for contingency plans and persistent engagements throughout. If we're manned to 100%.
Roger.
However, as you see, some theaters require more teams than others. So while we do not like to break regional alignment, there's times that we have to. And we're going to, instead of piecemealing personnel and breaking their regional alignment and sending them into battalions and companies that are not regionally aligned, what we're looking at doing now for some mission sets in theater is to deploy a company outside of their regionally aligned AOR to augment those theaters.
Roger.
An example would be in CENTCOM. The 96th has a heavy requirement for civil military support elements within the CENTCOM AOR, and they've been going pretty hard and heavy for the past 16 years in the CENTCOM AOR.
Right.
We are now looking at rotating in companies from other battalions to pick up some of those missions in the CENTCOM AOR, specifically the combat-oriented missions that may be best suited compared to the civil military support element missions for somebody that is not specifically regionally aligned to the CENTCOM AOR.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So I've seen the public information on the website for the 95th that says that it's been in the process of growing, right? From 2017, there are about 1,200 soldiers to more than 1,800. Did that happen? Did that growth take effect?
Well, we did get a good bit of that growth complete. We've sort of settled it right now at about 1,700 soldiers, civilians within our brigade. We're not projecting any growth in the near future. And with minor exceptions, we seem to be about the right size to meet our current mission requirements.
Okay.
We've got 150 regionally aligned deployable civil affairs teams, 30 companies, and 5 battalions that are able to meet the theater, special operations command, and geographic combatant commander requirements. Where future growth will be will really be on the margins and with our enabler populations, as we're looking for minor growth and adjusting our MTO in the future.
Roger. Yeah, because I know the overall civil affairs forces have gone up and down over the years, wax and wane, depending on the requirements from higher. The Marine Corps was thinking about getting rid of a group. I think they may be adding. I know the 85th, right, was downsized to a battalion that's now active duty at Fort Bragg, supporting conventional units, but also assisting the 95th, I believe. And now, you guys are thinking about what the future is going to hold and what the requirements from the national security plans essentially require of you to be going up or down.
Right.
And I know that takes a while. Once there's a demand signal, you can't just turn on the spigot right away and say that someone is CA, NCO, or CA officer qualified. That takes a while to build that pipeline.
Absolutely. One of the tenets of special operations is they can't be built in an emergency. They can't be surged in an emergency. So forecasting in the future, as you know, the civil affairs pipeline on the active side is a year long for most, and up to a year and a half, 2 years for the guys going through the special operations combat medic course. So. Yeah. We really need to do our best to forecast out for what the needs of the future are, so that we can have that force ready when we need them.
Roger. So CSM Banfield, some of my active duty CA friends have talked about how they deploy a little more often than the reserve CA forces do, but for shorter periods of time. So could you talk with the audience about what that deployment to dwell ratio has been looking like these days? How long a typical deployment for a CA team in one of your battalions may last?
Sure. Within the 95th, we're currently just below a 1 to 2 deployment to dwell ratio, and we're confident that we'll be at a 1 to 2 deployment dwell ratio by the end of this fiscal year. Within our brigade, our current deployments tend to be 6 months for persistent engagements, and then there's many opportunities for shorter missions in between those 6-month deployments. However, this doesn't really take into consideration a range of other requirements that take our soldiers away from their homes and families. Where our goal is a 1 to 2 deployment to dwell ratio, I think that a better measure of the health of the force is actually the purse tempo, or head off pillow time. I say this because it doesn't matter to the spouses, children, and families of our service members whether our soldiers are deployed to a theater conducting operations, on temporary duty within the United States, or conducting training at a combat training center. Time away from home is time away from home. It's the cumulative effect of missing birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays that really wear down our force and families. So we're striving to meet that 1 to 2 deployments to dwell ratios within the 95th, but our brothers and sisters in the 83rd Civil Affairs Battalion are at about a 1 to 1 deployment dwell ratio, which speaks volume about the demand for civil affairs forces across the geographic combatant commands, and they're doing their best to bring that down, get closer to a 1 to 2, but the demand signal is so high for active duty civil affairs forces that it's a challenge.
Right. I guess that's why I saw an email that came out in the last couple of days with a call for active duty. They're looking for more people.
They are. So I believe you're talking about the call for active duty, and I took extreme notice of that, and I was hoping that was a call for active duty for enlisted also. But from what I read of that call for active duty, that was focused solely on officers and warrant officers.
Okay.
Did you get a different read on that?
No, the same. But you do need more NCOs, is that right?
Absolutely. So our NCO core is our NCO population is really the core of the MOS. And I believe we've got a vast pool of talent within the reserve forces. The 38 Bravos in the reserve forces are incredible. And I'd love to figure out the way to get them a pathway onto active duty for those that are interested.
That's awesome. Folks, you've been listening to an interview with the 1CA podcast with Command Sergeant Major Garric Banfield of the 95th Civil Affairs Brigade. When we come back, we'll talk with CSM Banfield about the greatest strengths and some areas of improvement in the 95th and some examples of engagements and partners that the 95th has been working with over the last several years and where they're heading in the future. So stick around. The Civil Affairs Association continues to expand its value to its members. The association recently established the Professional Publications Advisory Board and a supporting research library. Founded by the late Dr. Kurt Miller, retired Army Colonel, the CA Association Professional Publications Advisory Board comprises scholars and policy and publications experts to assist civil affairs professionals in publishing papers and articles in established professional journals. As a service to association members, the board also provides a research library to conduct research on academic or professional papers. Check out the website to find out which board members may be of greatest help and request their assistance by emailing the board. This is an amazing resource that you won't find in many other associations. If you're not yet a member of the Civil Affairs Association, go online to civilaffairsassoc.org and join today. Hi, and welcome back to the 1CA podcast. I'm your host for today's episode, John McElligott. We're joined today by Command Sergeant Major Garric Banfield, the CSM of the 95th CA Brigade at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. CSM Banfield, could you talk with the audience here about the greatest strengths that you've identified that you see from your perspective for the 95th CA Brigade?
Yes, sir. So without a doubt, the greatest strength of the 95th Civil Affairs Brigade is the professionalism and dedication of our soldiers, NCOs, officers, and civilians. I'm always amazed at the caliber of NCOs, officers that we're getting from the civil affairs pipeline and the ones that are currently and have been serving within our brigade. And it's not only our brigade, across the entire branch, including the 83rd SWIC and our reserve counterparts. The quality and strength of our core is really the individual soldiers. Our brother and sisters across the active and reserve components have the same strengths and capabilities as the soldiers within the 95th. So the soldiers, NCOs, officers of the 83rd Civil Affairs Battalion, 1st and 3rd Battalions of SWIC and the reserve have a reputation of professionalism and expertise in their field that resonates throughout the Army and the Joint Force. And this is exactly what I see as our critical capability that we contribute to the Army, is the individual soldiers and officers that are focused on civil affairs activities and operations.
That's awesome. It's good to hear. And I echo everything you just said. I've seen the same thing in my years as well. So on the flip side, what would you say are some of the greatest weaknesses or areas in need of improvement?
As a branch where I see that we have the greatest opportunity to strengthen is in the way that we portray ourselves to the Army and how we interact and integrate with the Army and joint partners. As civil affairs professionals, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves on Army and joint doctrine and figure out how we fit in and how we can communicate best and influence the Army and joint environment to focus on the civil aspects within the range of military operations. A lot of that comes down to educating ourselves and understanding the vernacular and lexicon used by the Army and Joint Force, so that when we walk into that talk and talk to the commander and provide advice on how he's conducting operations in respect to the civil domain and what he needs to consider for civil aspects in his operations, we're able to communicate, and that's what's going to build the credibility of our Corps within the Army and Joint Force.
Yeah, good point. So one of those documents, I guess, you talk about doctrine, is the latest FM 3-57. Would you say that people should read that, or are there other documents that people should look at, maybe Joint Sim or some other things you've been tracking?
So absolutely. But also on the Army publication website is a slew of Army training publications that focus on civil affairs and civil affairs operations. And pulling those down and reading those and getting to know the vernacular in terms of Army doctrine and how the Army sees civil affairs is going to make our force stronger and better able to interact with our Army units. There's also a civil affairs white paper out that's looking at civil affairs capabilities and out to 2025 and what we're going to need to do as a force to change to meet the future operating environment.
Great points. So I know there's a wide range of engagements and partners with whom 95th soldiers work. Could you provide some examples of those?
Sure. The civil affairs professionals from the 95th Civil Affairs Brigade, the 83rd Civil Affairs Battalion, and our reserve brothers and sisters worked with an incredibly wide range of partners that span from military members across the U.S. services, U.S. interagency partners, foreign military counterparts, and then indigenous populations and institutions. The ability of our civil affairs professionals to engage with this multitude of partners is our greatest strength and contribution to the nation. Civil affairs forces are at the tip of the spear countering maligned actors that are wielding influence in our partner nations. In many cases around the world and within several combatant commands, civil affairs forces are the execution arm of American diplomatic efforts. In several theaters, civil affairs forces are building resiliency and resistance to our peer competitors. They're conducting civil reconnaissance and civil engagement to bring back atmospheres and build a common understanding of the operating environment in current and future contested areas. And in short, civil affairs are the economy of force for the Department of Defense in exerting influence around the world.
Yeah, they absolutely are. There's a lot of punch packed into a civil affairs NCO officer who's gone through the qualification process, speaks another language, understands how to interact with people in ways that the typical soldier just hasn't been trained, and they have additional education and engagements to be able to move around the battlefield in ways that other soldiers simply do not. And I had the pleasure of going through the CA qualification, the last couple stages on Operation Slust Tiller, with active duty CA soldiers on my team. We had mostly NCOs, a couple other officers. I thought it was a great experience, and we had a great opportunity to learn a lot about active duty and reserve perspectives from both sides. Do you know if there are any other opportunities for active duty and reserve CA forces to train or deploy together, or is there a firewall between the two?
Sir, I see no firewalls. In fact, the active duty and reserve component civil affairs forces are blood relatives. While each unit has their specific area of strength, we need to seek every opportunity to work together and to build relationships and capitalize from each other's strengths. In fact, 95th recently partnered with the 304th Civil Affairs Brigade out of Pennsylvania for a training exercise across 3 western states, where one of our battalions received exceptional mentorship in the areas of support to civil administration, public safety, and public works and utilities. Another example of the 95th partnering with reserve counterparts is an upcoming validation exercise that we're going to be running later this year, in which we're coordinating with role player and observer trainer support from the 352nd Civil Affairs Command out of Maryland and the 412th Civil Affairs Battalion out of Ohio. The 95th is committed to improving our coordination, collaboration, and working relationships with our reserve brothers and sisters. While missions and capabilities vary by unit and component, I believe that the more we work together, the better we'll be integrated. The 95th Civil Affairs Brigade and the 83rd Civil Affairs Battalion have the luxury of being co-located on Fort Bragg, and we have a very, very close working relationship. And while there are differences in mission essential tasks between the capabilities between the units, the quality of soldier is equal. The 95th and the 83rd have a very close working relationship, including cross-pollination of civil affairs soldiers between units. The only real difference between the unit is who our end customers are. The 95th supports Theater Special Operation Commands, and the 83rd supports United States Army Forces Command. An example of the minute differentiation of capabilities is that the 95th is chartered with the unique mission of coordinating unconventional warfare, whereas the 83rd Civil Affairs Battalion has the responsibility of maintaining the company ready to execute the Global Response Force mission within 18 hours. While these are missions that either unit could conduct with adequate lead time, the specificity of mission requirements allows them to focus on training and resources and being prepared to execute those missions at a moment's notice. And then there's our reserve counterparts, who are charged with providing functional specialists from the 16 functional areas. There's no way that the active component civil affairs units could sustain unit readiness while also sustaining expertise in these functional areas. So I see the Civil Affairs Corps as a family of professionals united in achieving national interests through a multitude of capabilities that are applied across the entire range of military operations.
Yeah, amen to that. I do see that as we really complement each other. I hope that we continue to train together. Deployments, the missions are going to be different, but we'll run across each other for sure downrange and in other countries as we prepare to do these missions and hand off to each other. From what I've seen at the junior level, at the tactical level, as long as we have the points of contact, we know who they are. If a reserve unit, for example, is deploying somewhere, you've got a battalion, obviously, that monitors that country and that AOR constantly. And for the reserve side, we're not doing that all the time. At least sharing information and country studies and the latest running estimate before you go into the country would be a huge opportunity to get a reserve unit spun up on what's happening. And certainly on the high side, you have people who are qualified to engage and talk that way as well.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to finish this conversation with a couple questions. For example, if you came across an infantry sergeant who was considering whether to apply to SOF, Special Operations Forces, then what would your pitch be to look at civil affairs?
Great question, sir. I routinely engage with soldiers from a variety of career fields who are considering a future in Special Operations Forces. So my pitch to them focuses primarily on the level of responsibility that they'll be entrusted with on a small team, the influence that they'll wield on behalf of the nation, and the great training that they'll receive, and especially the adventure of what they'll encounter as an NCO in civil affairs. I don't think there's a better job in the Army than being an NCO on a civil affairs team. There's nowhere else in the Army that a staff sergeant or sergeant first class has a strategic effect on a region or theater that they do on a civil affairs team. Our NCOs are routinely entrusted to engage directly with U.S. country teams and embassies and indigenous partners and institutions around the world on behalf of theater commanders. The language skills and cultural expertise that they gain through the training pipeline is exceptional. And they'll always be confronted with and expected to solve complex problems with little more than the knowledge of the nation's interests and an understanding of the strategic intent. It's a great job, and what we're really looking for are problem solvers. Once they've mastered the trade at the tactical level for a minimum of 2 years, they'll be afforded the opportunity to return to Army formations at echelons between battalion through corps level to advise commanders on how those commanders can engage the human component of the land domain. This is an opportunity to shape the way our Army sees a modern battlefield and fights wars. Also, the opportunities for training and education within civil affairs are unparalleled anywhere within the Army. All active duty civil affairs soldiers are required to be airborne and language qualified. Our civil affairs forces have access to the Army's best advanced leadership and training courses. Just a few examples are the Special Operations Combat Medic Course, SEER School, Ranger School, Sapper School, Pathfinder, Information Operations courses, and a wide variety of courses down at the Joint Special Operations University. We routinely send our NCOs through fully funded master degree programs and employ them at the strategic level. And the opportunities within the Civil Affairs branch are limitless. In short, our NCOs and officers are trusted, respected, and accomplished more than any other MOS within the Army. On the reserve side, I see the citizen soldier nature of our reserve force as one of the greatest strengths when it comes to having a real-world experience in the 5 functional specialty areas, which are security, justice and reconciliation, humanitarian assistance and social well-being, governance and participation, and economic stabilization and infrastructure. The fact that there are civil affairs NCOs and officers that do these functions daily in their civilian lives as their full-time profession gives a breadth and depth of experience that the active component could never replicate. I also see a lot of opportunity for the active duty force and reserve force to cross-pollinate. I'd love to see a pathway for Civil Affairs Reserve and AGR soldiers to attend the Civil Affairs Assessment and Selection and then serve within the active component, whether it be for a few years or the rest of their career. Similarly, we have several NCOs and officers within the active force that joined the Army with the intent of serving their country in uniform for a few years and then will return to civilian life. I see this as an opportunity to bring those civil affairs experts from the active component into the reserve force to further strengthen the relationship between the two, to break down those walls. I do see the reserve force as, no pun intended, a strategic reserve of talent for the active duty force. From the research that I've done, I believe it would entail the individual getting a DD Form 364 or conditional release for approval to come to active duty, and then approval through the Civil Affairs proponent to attend assessment and selection, and then enlisting through an Army recruiter to come active duty. There may be some additional training, such as airborne and language, that they need to attend before reporting to a unit if they're not already qualified. But if there are men and women out there that are interested, please, let's try to get them in touch with us. They can contact me personally through the Global Army listing and their Army Enterprise system. They can find me at Garric Banfield. Shoot me an email that they're interested, and I will make sure that we get them in touch with the right people.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I know posts everywhere have information about special operations recruitment, talking about the SF, PSYOP, and CA branches. So is anyone listening right now, please go to one of those briefs, learn more about civil affairs and the process of applying, but obviously reach out to anyone in the 95th, including, as he just mentioned, Command Sergeant Major Banfield. My final question for you is, for some of the active duty team sergeants, this may be the first time they've been in this role and had to manage a small team of fellow soldiers. What are some tips that you would share with those first-time active duty team sergeants?
Well, the best tip I can give to team sergeants or NCOs at any level is to remain true to the values and fundamental ethics and discipline expected of all Army leaders. And break down into a few simple rules. Number one, do the right thing, even when no one's looking. Civil affairs teams will inevitably find themselves operating alone and unafraid with little to no immediate supervision. I expect leaders to live by and enforce standards. This starts with the small things, military courtesies, appearance, PT tests, and quality of training that they're doing at home station. But if you're allowing these standards to be ignored in garrison and home station environment, you're building bad habits within your team. These bad habits will inevitably continue and grow downrange. Second, I'd say stay morally straight regardless of the situation in which you find yourself. We need our leaders to be the moral compass for their teammates that will keep them on the right azimuth. That's critical. At times, in the past, there have been ethical and moral missteps and miscalculations that have resulted in the loss of prestige to our nation. Those teams that are forward serving in foreign countries are a reflection and an ambassador of the United States. And that's a serious and heavy responsibility that they need to live up to. We send our teams into situations of high political risk, and they're entrusted to make the right decisions. As I frequently say, if you wouldn't do it or say it in front of a general officer, you probably ought to rethink what you're doing. Another good rule is do the routine things routinely well. A lot of what it is to be a team sergeant is the same as being a leader anywhere else in the Army. If you master the very basics, I'm talking about property accountability, administrative actions, counseling, individual and small unit training, general readiness of your team, etc., you're going to have a strong foundation to build on. Empower subordinates and teach others to do your job. If you find that the team, company, battalion, brigade, etc., can't function without you, that's a sign you need to focus on developing your subordinates. I've always had the luck of being surrounded by folks that are far more talented than I am, but I invest heavily in empowering leaders down to the lowest level possible to solve problems and exercise discipline and initiative. What that is not is passing your workload, problems, and blame onto others and then taking credit for the wins. What it is ensuring your subordinates understand the intent, the left and right limits, and allowing them to move out to the objective. It also means that you're ready to provide supporting fires when they need them and stand behind them when honest mistakes are made. It's our job as leaders to dust them off and get them back on the horse again. And that leads to my last point. Build trust. To be a great team, we must trust each other. Trust is a two-way street. In order to earn the trust of others, you have to not only be trustworthy and consistent in your words and deeds, but you also need to demonstrate your trust in others. You need to take every opportunity to exercise trust amongst your teammates. We've all heard the old adage of trust but verify. And some folks see that the verification part is a lack of trust. But I actually see that as a critical piece of building trust. It's an opportunity to reinforce trust between echelons.
Well, that's some great advice, and I hope that any active duty team sergeants listening to this will take that to heart. Brigade Command Sergeant Major Garric Banfield, the Brigade CSM of the 95th CA Brigade, the mighty warrior, as we've learned early on this podcast. Thank you very much for being on the 1CA podcast. I really appreciate your time.
I appreciate your time, sir. It's been an honor.
Thank you for spending some time with us. Please subscribe and come back for another installment of 1CA. Until then, be safe and secure the victory.